Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to the Caring Economy with me, your host, Toby Usnik. Again, we're in our 14th season, and we're really happy today to have as our guest the 20th president of Denison University in Granville, Ohio, Dr. Adam Weinberg. Denison, which was founded in 1831, is a private liberal arts college, a jewel of a college with a rich history and a commitment to providing transformative education. And we'll have a little bit of an explanation of what that promise, of what that means, transformative education. Dr. Weinberg has been at the helm of Denison since 2013, leading the institution through significant changes. Think about COVID and other things, and has been raising its profile regularly with all kinds of innovations, fundraising, and more. His focus on affordability, career readiness, and civic education has positioned Denison as a forward-thinking liberal arts college. I would submit one of your colleges of choice. So let's dive into our conversation with Dr. Weinberg, who I'm just going to call Adam, if that's all right, and about his journey and his vision for Denison and insights into the future of higher education. So welcome to the Caring Economy, Adam Weinberg.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. And it was worth making the commitment just to hear that nice introduction. So thanks.
Well,
Greg,
I have the good fortune. I'm very proud of all the guests we have on this show because they're amazing, impactful leaders like yourself. So rather than my tell it, why don't you give us a 4 or 5 minute overview of your life story, kind of where you came from, how you found your way, any mentors or pivots along the way? I know mentors are a big part of your sort of message.
I'm a born and bred Midwesterner, but actually had a kind of interesting upbringing. I was an ice hockey player. So it kind of took me all over the country, all over North America. And it was fortunate enough to go out east for high school. And then my life changed. I went to Bowdoin College as an undergrad, and it truly changed my life. And what changed my life about it are the things that still animate my work today. I found faculty who were just extraordinary mentors and pushed me in ways that at the time I didn't necessarily want to be pushed, but in retrospect, I'm eternally grateful for. Surrounded myself with peers who really also pushed me, brought out the best in me. I often say that the biggest impact of college is surround yourself with people bring out the best in you, not the worst in you. And then the third is I was on a campus that just allowed you to be engaged, right? To be engaged academically, co-curricularly. I played 4 years of varsity ice hockey, but also got involved in things that I probably would have been too embarrassed to try in high school. And so left Bowdoin a really different person than I came in, and made the decision that I wanted to stay active in education. So I went and got my PhD, taught at Colgate University for 11 years, wound up as the vice president and dean of the college, and really loved my years at Colgate. It was a great laboratory to think about, why does education matter? What are the kind of micro attributes that need to happen? And how do we make sure it happens for a greater percentage of college students? And then I left higher education. I had an opportunity to go run an organization called World Learning that works on education programs in about 80 to 90 countries around the world each year. It does extraordinary work. Anything that has to do with education, World Learning is involved with in different ways. And it was just an opportunity to do two things. One was to really focus on the things I care about, which is transforming people's lives through education. But the second is kind of cross-cultural education. You talked about it at Civic education earlier, but World Learning was a place that in any given year had young people from about 130 countries involved in our various programs. And so I learned a lot about what happens when you bring people together across differences to really learn from each other with a lot of curiosity and humility. And then came back to Denison. I was not planning to leave what I was doing, but a friend convinced me to come look, and I walked on this campus for the first time in fall of 2012 and just fell deeply in love in ways that at the time I couldn't really explain what I was falling in love with. But I think what I found here was a place that really shared my values and a place that shared my vision for where education needed to go, if it was both going to stay healthy, but also relevant in what was a rapidly changing world. And so I'm starting my 12th year. Average college presidency, I think, is 6 years these days. Yeah. So I can say each year, I just feel blessed and honored to be here. And I'm always really excited. We have 2,400 amazing students, extraordinary faculty and staff, and I think we do education the right way. So that's my 4 to 5 minute version.
I love it. I'm also a Midwesterner, a Buckeye from Akron, Ohio, so I'm happy to hear anyone sing the praises of the Midwest. I also am a product of a small liberal arts college called Hampton-Sydney College in Virginia, and I'm a big believer in small liberal arts colleges like Denison or Bowdoin. In fact, one of my best pals went to Bowdoin and had her wedding in the chapel there. So I share that with you, Adam. I wonder if you could just tell me a little bit about ice hockey. I had a couple years ago Kevin Parker on. He's a banker friend of mine and does a lot in sustainability, but he is a lifelong hockey enthusiast, has his kids playing it. And what he helped me understand is you will never meet a faster decision-making process in a human being than on ice. And I wonder if you find that to be the truth, and what else kept you involved in that for so long.
Yeah, and I'll start by saying I was a very mediocre ice hockey player, although I enjoyed doing it. My sister was an extraordinary ice hockey player and was the captain of I think the second U.S. women's national team. She now has three boys playing in the NHL. She was the first American with three boys drafted in the first round.
Wow.
Hockey
Wow.
runs deep in our family. Look, what I love about hockey is what I love about athletics in general, which is actually really what I love about anything you do in depth. So my wife was an oboist. I think that the same things transfer into the arts. And it starts with just learning to do something at a really high level, right? What does it mean to really learn to be performance oriented? And if you're lucky enough to grow up having an opportunity to really figure that out, you acquire a couple what I would call kind of habits. We often talk about skills and values. I actually think habits are the most important. I love James Clear's view on this, that we tend to sink to the level of our habits, not rise to the level of our goals. And so pay attention to your habits. But if you do anything in depth, you learn how to work hard, right? You learn that failure is not failure. It's just a necessary step towards success, right? So you learn to stumble forward. You learn how to do things in teams, right? And how to work with people who you may or may not like at a given moment, but are your teammates trying to get something done. You learn not just to open up yourself to mentorship and criticism, but to really crave it, right? So
Mhm.
what I loved about ice hockey was it just instilled really good habits and it was a ton of fun. People often ask about how I led Denison through COVID. It was a really hard year, but in many ways it was a really wonderful year because I got to work with people who I really respect to do something that many people thought wasn't possible in service of something I really care about, which is educating students. That's how I felt about ice hockey. You go out on the ice, you're doing something with other people who you respect, trying to do it in ways better than maybe people think it can be done, something you really care about. So forever
It's
grateful.
amazing to do it on terra firma is one thing, then do all that on ice is just amazing. I've never played ice hockey. My brother did. I mean, I've joked around with it, but ice skating I've done. So the other thing I want to ask you about, just jumping right into it, this concept of transformative education. I always think that transformative is a word pregnant with expectation. It's not something we say about ourselves or our activities, others say it of us. But I wonder if you might just talk a little bit about what transformative education is to you and to Denison, and how you deliver on that promise.
Yeah, so I think the way I often think about it is what separates a good college experience from a really life transforming experience, right? And so I will often say to our students, I want you to have a great 4 years. I want you to be weepy at graduation because you're grateful for the 4 years you've had. You've made friends, you've grown, you've um, had good mentors. But I don't want anybody to ever say this was the best 4 years of your life. I want you to come back in 50 years and say, my life turned out better than I ever could have imagined as a 17-year-old because of Denison. And so then it always begs the question, what has to happen at Denison for that to actually happen? And I think it's a couple things. And they basically fall into two buckets. It's about relationships and it's about experiences. On the relationship side, from my perspective, one of the single biggest predictors of how much a student will get out of college is, do you find mentors? And those are faculty, those are staff, often life staff, they're people you meet through work study jobs, they're coaches, but they're people who care about you, they connect with you, and they also catalyze you, right? Which means they care enough about you to actually push you a little bit, to give you a lot of support, but to push you hard so we can unlock your confidence and help you understand, right? Unlock your potential to be the architect of your own life. So the first is really being at a place and being open to, right? Arriving on a campus, open to and searching for mentors. The second is just the peer-to-peer impact. I believe very strongly that students who surround themselves on a college campus with peers who bring out the best in them will get way more from college. And part of that is surrounding yourself with people who are like you, but also people who are not like you. So I often say to our students, one of the things I love about Denison is we have a wide range of students. Whatever your political views are, there's people on this campus who have different ones, right? Whatever your religious practices are, there's people on this campus who have different. And the wider your circle of friends, the more you're open to learning and listening, the more you'll get from Denison. So the first is, I think it's all about the relationships. Did I find a mentor? Did I develop friends who brought out the best in me? Did I divide a wide circle of friends that opened up my mind and imagination, made me more curious? The second is experiences. You get a whole lot more from college when you're in a lab doing research not hearing about the work that the graduate students did, right? You get a whole lot more out of college when you're in the musical theater production, not in the audience watching. You get a whole lot more from college when you're involved in co-currics and learning good leadership skills than when you're reading about other people doing. You get a whole lot more when you're playing sports, not watching other people do it. And so being on a campus where you have lots of opportunities to get involved co-curricularly, right? To have those kinds of life-changing experiences where we tend to develop good leadership habits and skills. And quite frankly, also being on a campus where you get to not just follow things you're already interested in, but there's something about the campus culture that allows people to get over their fear of embarrassment and try things that they never would have tried in high school. Like for me, that's what it's about, right? Going to a place where you're going to find mentors, be surrounded by the right kinds of peers, and you're going to be fully engaged academically, but also fully engaged co-curricularly. The funny thing for me is those things are fairly simple. You can do them on most campuses, but if we're honest, far few college students actually do all three of those. And I think one of the things we've tried to do at Denison is to really pay attention to what do we have to do from the moment a student says they're coming to Denison through the end of their first year to make sure that they're hitting all three of those on-ramps.
Mm-hmm. And then I also like this concept of taking the long view, whether it's in business investing or as you're talking about with your students and your alumni. These are not just transactional relationships if they're done well, right? Like your mentors don't just stick with you for a month and then they're gone. Mentors are with you for life. You will remember them, you will cite them, you'll see them. So I like that you're taking that long view, and I suspect also helps with your fundraising and your alumni network. But two questions I want to ask you that tie into that. One is the admissions process, and the other is polarization with the diversity going on. So for the admissions process, how does Denison go about finding, identifying, recruiting, and retaining those Denison students?
Yeah, so look, I feel really fortunate. We had 15,000 applications last year for an incoming class of 620 students, a 70% acceptance rate. Our applications over the last few years have increased from about 4,500 a year to, threefold, basically, a little bit more. So we've been really fortunate on the admissions front. I think our success has been driven by a number of different things. One is I think we've been keenly aware of what it is that families and prospective students want in a private residential liberal arts college, right? So we've made some significant pivots, right? We've held on to the things that we do really well, right? Which is the relationships and experiences. And as I often say, you can develop those relationships and experiences at lots of different kinds of institutions, but you come to a place like Denison because you're really seeking them. And you know that on our campus, 100% of our students are going to develop relationships with faculty and staff. 100% of our students are going to develop good relationships, right, with peers. Everybody at Denison is involved in different things, right? So we've doubled down on our core. But second is we've really leaned into the career piece. My view is very strongly that I want to deliver students a life-shaping liberal arts education. I want to launch them like a rocket ship into their lives and careers. And I don't want to load them up with debt during the process. And so we've really focused on the three parts of that value proposition. And I think that's what's really driven our applications. I think the other piece is we just have happy students, right? We have a lot of students, a lot of parents who are kind of out there talking about the experience their students are having on our campus. So, we've been super successful over the last couple of years, but I think it's because we've really leaned into and tried to listen to our students, to our families, and to pay attention to where the higher education market's going.
I'm just hard pressed to figure out how an admissions officer can identify a happy person. I know it sounds simple, and you kind of would know it when you see it, but still 15,000 applications, you got to somehow choose someone who's less happy or less qualified or less a leader or just not Denison material. And I'm sure you have to waitlist or turn some away, but can you give us any insight of the algorithm that you use in admissions there to find the right talent?
Yeah, so we're trying to do this a little bit differently. We have an advantage of being a reasonably small place, right? So we try to encourage all of our students to come to campus. For students who that's sometimes financially hard, we try to make that financially possible for people. We want people to spend time on our campus to figure out this is going to be the right place for them. College is all about fit. And if Denison's going to be the right fit, we're super excited. If it's not, we want to help students kind of figure that out. So one is, I think, people come on campus, they get a much better sense of who we are and what we do and whether this is going to be a good fit for them. We've also leaned into the interviewing process a lot more than we did a couple of years ago. My view is that the college admissions process is way more stressful than it needs to be for high school students. If ever there was a process, we should find a way to deconstruct and reconstruct in ways that makes it easier for high school students to find the place that's going to be the best fit for them, to help families figure out what it's actually going to cost. And that takes the stress out of high school. That would be this process. So we're trying to do that a little bit by leaning into the interview process to say to students, we're absolutely paying attention to your grades and the courses you've taken, but we also want to know you as a person, right? So we've trained our admission staff, our senior interviewers to just try to do a better job trying to kind of source out who's going to really thrive at Denison. One of the things that I really care about is emotional intelligence. I want students to come to Denison who are smart, but I really want students to come to Denison who have a lot of emotional intelligence, who know how to be good friends to each other, right? You know how to work in teams. You're going to be really excited to be on a campus where you're going to be surrounded by people like you and people who are not like you, right? Students who are just at a point in their life where they're ready to really dive in and be super engaged. And I often say to prospective students, you don't have to be fully formed to come to Denison, but you got to be fully engaged. And that's not going to be for everybody. And we're actually okay with that.
I agree with that. It's about curiosity about the world around us, which is why I think we see a spike in experiential education, experiential travel, everything. I mean, we talked before we went online here, Adam, about there's so many great schools to choose from. I mean, how do you look at that whole phenomenon?
Yeah, we just went through this process with our last child, who I will be heartbroken to see go off next week, although super excited for her. You know, she had her heart really at the beginning of her junior year set on going to a particular institution. It's a great institution, but it would be one of those, that small handful of schools that's just super hard to get into. So I asked her for a day of her time, and we took her to see another institution that, of course, she fell in love with. And at the end of that day, I said to her, this school is very similar to the other place you have your heart set on going to. It's about the same size, locations are similar. Curriculum actually may be even a little bit more interesting than the other place. And this place fires on all cylinders in terms of launching students into the kinds of careers you're interested in. And guess what? This student takes 90% of its students. They'd probably take you today. So it was just a way to say to her, there's a lot of great schools out there. What I worry about are a couple of things. One is that students narrow too early in the process on a particular school, as opposed to looking to a wide range of institutions, right? Because one of the huge strengths of U.S. higher education is just the wide range of institutions we have, and they're all different in different ways. The bigger thing I worry about is we spend so much time focused on where our kids are going to go to college that once they get them, we think we're done and we're just started. And I wish we would spend a little bit less time on the front end and a whole lot more time talking about once you get in and make the decision, how are we going to make sure you really take advantage of the opportunities? Because, you know, I love Denison. I think everybody should want to come to Denison. But the reality is you can get a great education at just about any university in the country, but you're only going to do that if you show up knowing what it means to take advantage of it. I don't think we do a good enough job helping families understand what that means. And then I don't think we do a good enough job making sure students hit the on-ramp quickly, because it's only 8 semesters and they go really, really, really fast.
Well, I'm going to follow up with a question that, but first, ladies and gentlemen, I want to acknowledge again our guest today on the Caring Economy is Dr. Adam Weinberg. He's the 20th president of Denison University in Granville, Ohio. So we talked also previously about Jonathan Haidt's great work, in particular his book, Coddling of the American Mind. Are the kids showing up ready, locked and loaded, or are the parents over-involved? They can't all be perfectly ready and primed for undergraduate studies anywhere.
Yeah, so look, been in higher ed a long time, and I love this generation of students coming to college for a whole bunch of reasons. One is they care about the world. The second is it's a generation of young people who are showing up with all kinds of passions and interests, right? Whether it's athletics, the arts, the sciences, doesn't make a difference. But like every generation, there's things that we got to pay attention to. And I worry about a couple things with this generation. The first is I do worry a lot about the increased intention, especially in public schools, on standardized tests, which just it's squeezed out other things. I would love to see at some point for us to kind of rethink whether public high schools should spend so much time on standardized testing and maybe spend more time on other parts of personal development, quite frankly and honestly. The second is, you know, they've grown up in an environment where the politics and political discourse has been super polarizing, right? And you kind of combine that with social media. Often students feel like they have to pick a side and stick with it, or it's so contentious, they just don't want to engage, right? Because for all the kind of obvious reasons. And it's a generation that's grown up on social media, right? And spending lots of social media habits that I would like to see them kind of change once they get to college. So we are having to think a lot about that. How do we help students learn to engage in conversations across differences? That hasn't been role modeled for them particularly well. How do you use the internet and other sources to figure out what's true and what's not true? One of the essence of being a thinking human being is challenging orthodoxy every day, starting with your own. So how do you develop the habit of always seeking out alternative views, facts, and opinions? So I think I really like Jonathan's work. He actually has an organization called the Constructive Dialogue Institute that's doing really interesting empirical-based work on how do we interject certain tools and techniques into classrooms and other parts of college campuses that really help students learn that we can have fun debating ideas? How do we learn to really listen and hear the ideas of others, not hearing it to try to critique it, but to try to listen in ways that might allow me to learn? Because the essence of a democratic society is that different ideas clash into each other and better ideas emerge.
Mhm. I'm teaching a course now in critical thinking, and it's just fascinating because it's such an important skill for people to have, and yet it's not necessarily something that's taught or talked about. How do you look at the situation overall about polarization and how it's coming to roost on higher ed? And then more specifically to Dennis and your students, how do you make sure that this civil discourse continues when there's so much pushing us apart?
And, in some ways, I was well poised to think about this because I spent 8 years at World Learning focused on this issue. It's really hard in this historical moment for all kinds of different reasons, right? Everybody needs a grounding in the liberal arts. They just do. And for me, the liberal arts is about helping students develop 4 attributes. The first is critical thinking. Critical thinking is about learning to use reason, rationality, and data to understand the complexity of the world in its complexity. The second is creative problem solving. The world doesn't need more cynics and critics. The world needs more people who can understand the world and its complexity and then have the skills, design thinking, other kinds of creative problem solving skills to actually be able to chart paths forward, whether we're talking about our families, our communities, our organizations, our businesses, or our countries, right? The third is effective communication skills. And effective communication means that I can actually speak and have the habit of trying to speak in ways that others can actually hear. Effective communication is the bedrock of being able to learn across our differences, come up with better ideas. And then the last is the one that I think a lot about, which is intellectual humility. Walking through life with the keen understanding that you might not be right, and there's a 100% chance you're not 100% right. So you might want to spend part of every day challenging orthodoxy, starting with your own by seeking out alternative views, facts, and opinions. The skills, the values, the habits, and the experiences to be critical thinkers, creative problem solvers, and effective communicators who have intellectual humility. That if we don't do that, we're not going to get past the political polarization we have. And that is the role of higher education. The second is, how do we do that? Right? Obviously, that's got to be a part of what we do in our classrooms. And I think faculty across the country, for the most part, are really committed to doing that. But I think there's other parts of the college experience we don't pay enough attention to. So I believe that first-year residential halls are a really important place to help students learn to do this. They're going to have moments when they love their roommates and probably moments when they don't like their roommates. As an educator, I get most excited about the moments when your roommate's annoying you, because that's a great moment. Like learning to live with somebody that I don't like in the moment is a great life skill. And that requires effective communication, creative problem solving, humility. Maybe it's not all their fault, right? So we should think about residential halls as really laboratories for helping students develop these skills, values, and habits and have these experiences. But we're doing some cool stuff at Denison as well. We launched something called the Red Frame Lab a couple of years ago. It's got an internal and external consulting track. So we train students in design thinking. We then put them in groups of 4 or 5, and then they work on creative problem solving and effective communication together. So sometimes they're solving a campus problem. Sometimes they're doing a consulting project for a local nonprofit or business. But we've tried to think across the college, how do we provide more opportunities for students to take these liberal arts skills that hopefully they'll learn in the classroom, but then use our campus as a laboratory to practice them. Higher ed is on the front lines, has to be on the front lines of helping us beyond the polarization. So it may not be commonplace right now, but I'm super hopeful of the work that higher ed's doing and the impact that it's going to have both here and abroad.
Right. I also like the idea of sort of working across the ecosystems, the town and gown phenomenon. It sounds like you're also engaging your students and faculty in the larger community, not just on your own little bubble. Did you have any flare-ups on Denison campus with Gaza on October 7th?
I think some of the larger places, a bunch of the Ivies just had a really rough year. We had less of that on our campus, quite frankly. And I think that was true for most liberal arts colleges. But we absolutely had students who were concerned about what was going on in Gaza, students with different views. And we certainly had moments of teach-ins and other kinds of things on campus. But I actually think for the most part on our campus, everybody was trying to lean in and do the right thing. Doesn't mean every moment was great. Doesn't mean that there aren't things that I wouldn't do differently over last year, but I would say that about every year. But I actually was really, for the most part, really proud of our students, our faculty, staff. This is a really difficult moment. And I felt like people on our campus kind of leaned into it and generally tried to do the right thing.
I share that sentiment with Hampton Sydney. Our president sent email out to all alumni the week that it happened, just reminding people of the values of the college, its mission, and how we engage. And I thought that it was the right thing to do. And I think it reminded people and held us accountable. And to your point, sort of remind us we should lean into these situations, not try and divide.
That's how you deal with complex situations and find the creative path forward, and how you do it by actually understanding that it's a diversity of ideas that allow us to find the best ideas.
Yeah, and exercise those muscles.
Oftentimes, civic education, people think about it in terms of community service, which is important. Everybody should engage in community service, or it's voting. Everybody should, and I think everybody should vote, but that's not actually civic education. For me, civic education is about public work, right? It's about what Toby wrote about, what really is the essence of our country.
Yeah.
And public work is about what happens in our communities when people come together with people they know, people they don't know, and most importantly, people they know and just don't like, but they find ways to effectively work together across their differences to build the communities that we want to live in and that give us healthy lives. That's what gets me really excited. And what you just said is a really good example of that. You gotta come to the table. You gotta be willing to engage, right? You gotta be willing to creative problem solve. You gotta stay and see these things out.
Gosh, it's probably 25 years ago, Bowling Alone came out. How far have we come in civic engagement?
It's a tricky empirical question, right? And I think, Robert Putnam has continued to do a lot of writing about this, and I think he's right. And I think it's true whether we're thinking about how you effectively run a college or how you build your life or run a business or how our political leaders should think. If we get the relationships right, everything else falls into place. And I think it's hard in this moment. I think our public squares have disappeared in many places. What makes me excited is I think people realize this, and I see people in communities across the country trying to rebuild those public squares, but they're really crucial, right? And they're not political, right? Public squares are farmers markets, and they're public school places where they're main streets, right? They're the places we come together every day and build relationships that are meaningful to life, but also build the trust that allows us to deal with the challenges that every community has. When I think about Denison, you alluded to something earlier that I want to kind of pull out. I try to help our students understand the difference between a relationship and a transaction. Relationships are what anchor your life. Students really understand in a world where it's not just a value, it's a skill and a habit. So it's silly, but when I encourage our students when they're walking around campus to actually look each other in the eye and say hello. I tell students when I stop you in the quad and ask how things are going, it's not a rhetorical question. I actually want to know, how are things going, right? It's like, how do we model for students, for a new generation, what public squares look like, what relationships look like? I think that's what Putnam was really getting at, is the bonds of social trust that do two things. They make our lives more meaningful, more rich. And the second is they allow our communities to have the trust they need to kind of problem solve and stay healthy. And it's super interesting. There's been some research out recently kind of looking at places in the world where people tend to live longer, right? Clearly diet plays a role, but there's new research that suggests that part of it is the relationships are richer in those parts of the country. You tend to see people out later at night in the public square interacting with each other, right? People tend to spend more talking to each other.
Yeah, and we're human, we're animals by nature, so we need to interact. You also did a nice plug for my newest book, Connecting the Dots, Building Your Network and Legacy, because it's, yes, you can build your network, your following, your Twitter handle, whatever, but to what end? And that's the legacy piece, right? If you have a thought about what your purpose is in life, who you are, what you're meant to do, then you're going to be both more effective at welcoming the incoming, whatever it may be, and finding the good. And then as well going out, whether it's digitally through LinkedIn or through events and associations, hockey tournaments, whatever. Two last questions. I was at an institutional client conference at Goldman Sachs this spring, and the president of Middlebury College was interviewed by her board chair, who also is a banker at Goldman Sachs, and they spoke about AI. And they have really embraced, according to the president, AI in the liberal arts and sciences. And I am a big believer in AI, and I've been teaching courses in large language models. And I wonder, does Denison approach the topic of AI, and where do you see it taking us or factoring into higher ed over the next 5 years?
So Lori's done a really great job at Middlebury. I think one of the reasons that Middlebury and Denison have both been successful is we've kind of leaned into the new historical moment and thought about how we need to kind of pivot the liberal arts, right? And so AI is, careers has kind of been our major focus, and then we're now kind of focusing on AI. We think about it at Denison in two different ways. The first is AI is absolutely going to change what students need to know and how they're going to learn. I think it will open up unbelievable opportunities. And our faculty actually have been way out in front. They're actually been thinking about this and piloted things over the last couple of years. But just to give you an example, when we launched our Knowlton Center for Career Exploration 7 years ago, one of the things we learned early was if students didn't have good Excel skills, it was really hard to get a good internship. I think the same is now true for AI. If students show up at an internship interview and they don't have some basic competency around AI, they're just not going to get the internship, right?
Mm.
Because so we're doing a lot of work in the classroom to think about how do we kind of weave AI competency into some classes. We were the first liberal arts college in the country to have a data analytics program. We were actually one of the first liberal arts colleges in the early 70s to have a computer science program. So we're kind of well poised to do that. Our faculty in the humanities has been out in front of this. So that's one piece is what are students going to need to know that's different, and how are they going to learn differently, right? Is all going to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think faculty, at least at Denison, are kind of both on top of this, leaning into it with curiosity and just beta testing a lot of different stuff and talking to our students. But the second is it's going to change how we run the college. And we're just thinking about how do we use AI to do everything we do at Denison bigger, better, and bolder. And I'll give you one example. We launched our first AI-empowered piece of software about 18 months ago with a company called Protopia. We are a deeply relational place. We're also really focused on careers. One of Denison's assets is we have generations of alums who are super excited to help our students. One of the challenges is it's hard sometimes to match a student with an alum. So the way it worked prior to AI is a student would go into our Knowlton Center, they would talk to a career coach, and the career coach would try to use LinkedIn and other databases to connect them, which was fine. With Protopia, we launched something called Ask a Denisonian, where a student can type in any career-related question.
Mm-hmm.
It uses AI-empowered software to find the 6 alums who are most likely to be able to help you. It contacts them on your behalf. If they're willing to help, it then matches you based upon how you want to connect with them and they want to connect with you. Zoom, phone call, coffee. It's been unbelievable. We're able to tap into all of our alums, not going back to the same ones all the time. The matches are much more nuanced, right? They're quick. Alumni are super excited, and it's freed up our career coaches to spend less time on LinkedIn and much more time doing the coaching, the relationships. It deepen relationships at every end. What I also love being a relational college is Protopia has told us that we're breaking their algorithms because so many of our alums are willing to help.
I love that. I'm going to check it out.
One of the reasons we've been so successful at Denison is we made a big career pivot strategically in 2014 and kind of said, look, we're going to double down on the core of the liberal arts, but we're also going to become career oriented, right? We don't be known as a place that just quickly launches students into lives and careers. And so we did a bunch of different things, right? We launched a whole new generation of academic programs that are still rooted in the liberal arts, but with a little bit more of a sense of where the world is going. So as I said a minute ago, we were the first liberal arts college in the country to have a data analytics program. So imagine data scientists who can work with large data sets, but also liberal arts skills to communicate results, to work in teams, to go out to dinner with a client. We also launched our Knowlton Center, which was a whole fresh look at how you prepare students for careers. Too many colleges wait for students to show up their senior year. We start, our view is you got to start early and often, and you got to start big. You got to start by asking students, not what job do you want, but what kind of life do you want to live? What kind of human being do you want to be? And then how do you build careers that allow you to architect those lives? We run something called the Denison Edge. I think we're the only liberal arts college that does this, where you can major in anything you want, but then get a second credential through Denison Edge in marketing, finance, right? Data, right? Just closing skills gaps. We're knocking it out of the park in terms of giving students multiple internships and career-related projects. So I think the formula is really right. I think AI is the next leap forward with all this. This is the kind of work of liberal arts colleges. How do we continue to do what we do really well, but how do we also make sure we're just launching students quickly into their careers and their lives?
It's awesome. I mean, I can't think of anything better than I'm biased, but a classic liberal arts and science education for using this technology, both left brain and right brain. So I'm glad that you're offering it to your students. Now, you've shared many pearls of wisdom throughout this past half hour or so, but I wonder if you want to just maybe give any last word on words of wisdom you would give, or any mantras that come out of your mouth regularly.
Oh, that's a good question. I think I've been really fortunate to have good mentors at every step of my career. And I don't think mentors just happen. I think you have to be open to it, right? And so what I always say to our students is develop relationships. Seek out people who will care enough about you, connect enough with you to kind of catalyze you a little bit. The second is you can't be motivated by your fear of failure. You have to be motivated by the opportunity maybe to perform at a higher level than you thought you could. And so, I had lots of career stumbles along the way. But I saw them as opportunities to kind of learn and grow. The third is, and I often say this to our students, careers are many things, but they're not linear. Life is not linear. It only looks linear when you look backwards. But I think good lives are built by people who have a keen understanding about the kinds of human beings they want to be. They seek out mentors, they seek out experiences, they have emotional agility and resiliency, and they see it kind of as a journey. I would say the last piece of advice, the thing I wish I had known earlier in my life and career, I picked up a big mindfulness practice in this phase of my life. And, what I've learned from that is just to be present in the moment, right? To not worry about what happens in the past, not worry about the future, but just be present in the moment, pay attention to it, show up every day, giving it my all, and kind of see where things go. And we're trying to do a lot of work on our campus right now, helping students kind of instill within themselves the kind of approach to life and careers that's based in a view of mindfulness.
Love that. Well, there's so many more things I want to talk to you about. We're gonna have to do another interview next year, maybe around everything, tenure, social media, and so forth. But Dr. Adam Weinberg, President of Denison University, thank you for joining us today on the Caring Economy. And have a great fall kickoff. And I really do hope to meet you one day in person, either out there or in New York.
Thanks, and thanks for having me on the show.